Earlier this week, EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt announced that the so-called war on coal was over. The EPA rolled back the Clean Power Plan from the Obama administration, which was meant to reduce emissions from fossil fuels. At the same time, the coal industry is slowly dying, and many states are looking to green energy alternatives without the help of the federal government. California is one of those states, and some advocates have been pushing for a different way of running utilities as a means to raise funds for new sources of green energy. These plans are known as Community Choice Aggregation, which would create a governmental agency to control the utility instead of a company like Sempra's SDG&E. Let's dive deeper into this plan and what it would mean for San Diego. I'm Daniel Wheaton, and this is Refocus. To get a deeper understanding of this subject, we have environment reporter Joshua Emerson Smith in the studio. Joshua, welcome to the show. Could you give us an overview of what community choice aggregation is? It sounds really complicated, and it sounds like it is.
Community choice aggregation is a government-run alternative to your local investor-owned utility, not in the same way that a fully government-run program like a municipal authority is. So don't think LA Water and Power or Anaheim has a municipal utility, or SMUD up in the East Bay of like where Oakland is. This is where the investor-owned utility continues to operate the grid, but the local, say it's a city council or board of supervisors, they have control over the buying and selling of the electricity. So when you get your bill in the mail, it will have charges for just the general, the fixed charges for distribution, which in our case would be San Diego Gas and Electric. But then there's also the generation charges. So this is everything. This is the charges for how much electricity you use. And right now, the utility buys and sells that power, and they are regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission. So those rates are set by state regulators, and they determine to a certain extent that exchange between the utility and the regulators determines how much rates are. But under this scenario, the local officials would be the ones buying and selling the power and determining how much they're going to charge you, per kilowatt hour.
Okay. So why do you walk us through what needs to happen for this to be put in place? Because it's still being debated, correct?
Yeah, in San Diego, it's still being debated. There's 8 or so community choice aggregation programs around the state. The first one was in Marin. That's Marin Clean Energy. They formed in 2009, 2010. I think they went into effect. What would happen here is that the city of San Diego would vote. Basically, the city council in the city of San Diego would vote to create this entity, and then it would go through several steps. So right now, there's a feasibility study that the city did that looked at rates and what we should expect from a community choice aggregation program over time. The next step is to vote to send out a request for proposals, an RFP, for a third-party consultant to draft a business plan. The business plan would come back, and then they would take the next vote to, come up with a plan of how to put it all together and start the community choice aggregation. So there's a lot of public votes involved, and eventually you get to a point where you're setting up either a joint powers authority, quite often, which would be a larger government entity that then other cities, say in the San Diego region, could join, or the county could join it, and you can get everyone together. Or they could set up an enterprise fund. So this is the kind of fund that runs, like the sewer, their sewer bills and stuff like that. And the idea here is that you're insulating the general fund from the city's general fund from any kind of long-term debt that's accrued under the community choice program. So say they went through and they did all this, they formed a joint powers authority or the enterprise fund, then there's several different options, but just kind of like roughly speaking, what the city council would probably do would be to set up a decision-making body that would be staffed with industry consultants, experts about buying and selling electricity, and then that staff would inform a vote-taking body. It may be the board, it may be the city council, maybe it's a subset of the city council. If it's a JPA with lots of different governments in the region involved, then it could be, one member from each city council from the cities that are involved, that kind of thing. And then you set up this decision-making body. And the idea is then the ratepayers, feel like they have more recourse to talk to their local elected officials about the decisions that are being made in terms of buying and selling power, and then also what to do with the revenues that come from that. So you probably know that SDG&E has programs that you can take advantage of. Say if you're low-income resident, you want to try to qualify for a program. Say you want rebates on specific things. Do you want like energy-efficient appliances that you're going to apply for? All these programs are, funded with revenues from ratepayers. So the CCA, or the Community Choice Aggregation Program, would have its own type of programs, and maybe what they want to focus on is giving more money to people to incentivize the use of solar, or to incentivize the use of electric vehicles. And to a large extent in California, the community choice aggregation programs have been focused on trying to boost the use of renewable energy. That's largely what's driving this.
Mm-hmm. And this plays into the Climate Action Plan, correct?
So the advocates for community choice aggregation have been going around the county and trying to convince cities to adopt climate action plans with aggressive pledges to use more renewable energy. In the case of the city of San Diego, they've pledged to use all renewable energy by 2035, and the advocates for community choice aggregation say that that's the only way that the city's going to make good on that pledge, because that's one way that the city could control how much renewable energy they use. And so that actually raises this other point, a more technical point, where when you are when a city forms a community choice aggregation, say the city of San Diego does, then for all the members in that jurisdiction, all the ratepayers in that jurisdiction, they automatically get switched into the community choice program. And if they want it, but if they feel like, oh, well, actually SDG&E has better rates, they can opt out. They can go back to the investor-owned utility, kind of creating a little competition. But the general point is that the city first gets control of all these accounts and can say, okay, we're going to make big decisions about how we're going to purchase electricity going forward. And we want it to be all green or 50% green by this point and all green by that point.
Mm-hmm. And you've touched on this in some of the other answers, but could you lay the political kind of sides to this debate? Who wants this and who doesn't?
So going back to 2009, when Marin Clean Energy first started looking, or in the run-up to the 2009 vote, I believe, by Marin to form the first CCA in California, Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, put up a huge fight. And there was lots of mail sent and commercials and all kinds of, there was just a very fiery public debate. The California legislature decided that they didn't like PG&E's use of ratepayer dollars to try to influence the adoption of community choice aggregation. And so California outlawed the use of ratepayer dollars to do so. What they can do, as something of a workaround, is they can form a marketing arm that's funded solely with shareholder dollars. And that in San Diego, actually earlier this year became the first San Diego Gas and Electric became the first investor-owned utility to ask the Public Utilities Commission to allow for the creation of one of these marketing arms. It is housed under SDG&E's parent company, Sempra Energy. It's called Sempra Services, and it's funded just with the shareholder dollars. And so they have started weighing in on this. Now, it's important to before we get too into the details of what's going on in San Diego, it's important to understand that investor-owned utilities still lobby the legislature on policies around community choice aggregation. For example, a couple of years ago, they tried to push a bill, and they're allowed to, and they tried to push a bill that would have required when a CCA is formed, all ratepayers in a jurisdiction to opt in rather than being automatically enrolled and then opting out. Of course, the supporters of CCA did not like this. They felt that most ratepayers were not aware of the system as a whole and would not opt in on their own. And so actually that bill was eventually killed with a tremendous amount of opposition from the CCA supporters and others. This year, the investor-owned utilities have asked the legislature to put all new community choice aggregation programs on hold while a technical issue is worked out at the Public Utilities Commission, which I'll get into in a second because it's very relevant to what's going on here in San Diego. But I just wanted to make the larger point that investor-owned utilities are very active in Sacramento in terms of lobbying on this issues. But when it comes to a local jurisdiction's decision of whether to form a CCA or not, they're not allowed to use ratepayer dollars to do so. And if they want to use shareholder dollars, they have to go through a fairly rigorous process of applying with the PUC to do so. It took, I think, from beginning to end, it took about a year for them to get the whole thing. I have to double check that, but it definitely took at least 6 months, if not a year, to get the whole thing approved. So now here we are, and you're asking what exactly? What are you curious about?
The political landscape here in San Diego. Who are some groups that support this, and who are some groups that are opposed to it? I mean, obviously SDG&E has an opinion, but what about people in the city council and other political leaders in San Diego?
So I think the best thing to do is to start with SDG&E. They cannot have an opinion. They are not allowed to have an opinion, right? But but the marketing arm that they petitioned the CPUC to set up on Sempra Services does have an opinion. And their public-facing opinion is pretty nuanced. They do not necessarily oppose community choice aggregation, but they have asked local jurisdictions to wait on or to put these to stop, to kind of like freeze looking into it while certain things play out at the Public Utilities Commission. And the number one thing that they're concerned about is, and we're going to, I mean, if you thought we were in the weeds before, we're going in the weeds now, okay? So there's this thing called the exit fee. Now, this is to make this is to make sure that ratepayers who remain with the investor-owned utility don't get caught paying for long-term contracts that the investor-owned utility entered into on behalf of the ratepayers that then subsequently left for a community choice aggregation program. So think about it like this. You're the investor-owned utility, and several years ago, I mean, how many years has it been now? 5 years ago, roughly, the legislature says to you, okay, guys, everyone has got to start buying renewable energy. I don't know if you remember this, but the state, they have these mandates for all of the utilities, and it actually extends to community choice aggregation programs already. You have to buy increasingly more renewable energy as time goes on, up to I'm gonna mess this up. What is it? Is it 40% now, by 40% green energy by 2050? I should know that off the top of my head, but there's a lot of numbers floating around in my head right now. So basically, you had to continue to buy more, and when it started around, I think it was like 2012, they had to start buying renewable energy and adding it to their portfolio almost immediately. And so when these big investor-owned utilities, the three big ones again, SDG&E, PG&E, and Southern California Edison, SCE, started buying solar and wind, and at that point, 5 years ago, it was significantly more expensive than it is now. So they entered into these long-term contracts, which was very good for the solar and wind industry. It helped kind of establish them and get the momentum going in those industries. But those were kind of expensive contracts, and they were for 15, 20, 25 years. So now that the cost of renewable energy has dropped, for say a new CCA comes on the market, this power is a lot cheaper than it used to be. If they're taking customers away from the investor-owned utility, the state has said, okay, wait a minute, you still have to make them whole for those long-term contracts that they entered into on behalf of the customers that left. Are you following me still? Tell me if I need
It's okay. There's a lot of steps to this, obviously. Yeah.
So that this thing's called the exit fee, and it's vigorously debated. CCA supporters say it's too high. Investor-owned utilities say it's too low, and every year it gets readjusted. Mm-hmm. But this year, the Public Utilities Commission has said, not only are we going to readjust it, we're going to totally overhaul the formula. We want CCAs to have more predictability on a multi-year basis about what what they're going to be responsible for. And we also want to make sure that the investor-owned utilities are made whole for these long-term contracts that they entered into, because if they're not, then the ratepayers that remain with the investor-owned utility could see their bills go up. Mm-hmm. And that's not fair. Like, we're looking out for all ratepayers, whether they're in a CCA or whether they're in an IOU. So they are redoing the exit fee, and San Diego Gas and Electric is saying, hey, hold on, we can't make any decisions about this until the exit fee is done. And the exit fee, we're supposed to see a draft by next summer, 2018. And the supporters of CCA say, this is all nonsense. Like, there's no reason to be freaked out about the exit fee. Even if it goes up a little bit, it's not going to dramatically undermine the ability of CCAs to compete with investor-owned utilities. And by the way, it's going to take us several years to actually get to the point of adopting a CCA in San Diego. And so you guys should just move forward at a parallel track. If you need to pull out at the last minute, no big deal. Plus, these are enterprise funds and JPAs, so it's not as if the city is liable for any kind long-term debt incurred by the CCA. That's the argument from the supporters. So what's happened on the ground is that the city of San Diego now is in kind of the beginning stages of looking at this, and we don't know where everyone's going to stand. Both sides have been lobbying City Hall pretty hard. The county of San Diego earlier this year, though, decided to put their program on ice. They decided to freeze it pretty much indefinitely. We don't know when it's coming back. Diane Jacob was pushing for it, and the rest of the supervisors basically refused to vote on a motion to push it forward, and Sempra Services was there pushing very hard for that outcome, and we haven't seen anything from the county yet since then. There are several North County cities that are looking into feasibility studies, and actually the city in the region that's the farthest along in this is Solana Beach, which for all intents and purposes are moving forward. They're at the last stages. They would kind of quibble with that and say, well, there's still time for us to pull out, but they've jumped through a lot of hoops. They're like closing in on a big vote that would make it official, and they've spent a lot of time and energy on that. Once they form a CCA, those CCAs could be, and if multiple jurisdictions form CCAs, like I said, and then one region wants to take the lead on this, like say San Diego, and form a joint powers authority, they could all get an agreement to get together and have more purchasing power to buy energy. And that's kind of what we're seeing up in Los Angeles. The county of Los Angeles took the lead, formed this JPA, for a community choice aggregation, and they're in the midst of setting that up. And then they think that cities like Torrance and Long Beach will eventually get on board. There's all these questions about what the voting structure is going to look like, who's going to have what seat on the board, and how much, So there's this like kind of internal wrangling that happens among the jurisdictions when you form these multi-jurisdictional groups. But the LA one seems like it's going forward. The big issue, okay, do you want to jump in or you want me to keep going?
Keep going.
The big issue for San Diego, and maybe for investor-owned utilities in general, revolves around the exit fee. And it's because if you say you have a CCA and it represents, and say you're an investor-owned utility and your service area has a couple of CCAs and they represent, say, 5% of the energy purchased in the region, okay? It's important to have the exit fee dialed in so that you're not missing out on revenue that you're due that could impact other ratepayers. If that percentage goes up, though, from 5%, what the investor-owned utility will say is, and they get very skittish on this, the exit fee really needs to be dialed in, because it needs to be more and more precise the bigger the group, the percentage of people that are switching out of their program, right? Because now we're talking about big sums of money changing hands. We've got to make sure everything is working smoothly. In San Diego, the city of San Diego represents about 40% of SDG&E's current electrical sales. Mm-hmm. So it would be a huge thing for them. It would be an experiment in California with CCAs like we haven't seen before. It would just be like overnight, all of a sudden, 40% is controlled by the city. Let's hope that exit fee is dialed in so nothing weird happens. And what the utility, what some analysts have said is what the utility is really worried about is if that exit fee is not dialed in and rates do go up, then people in other jurisdictions will say, oh, we got to form a CCA. Like, these rates are out of control here in San Diego. And if enough people get into the CCA, the debate about the exit fee becomes, and this is not me saying this is what analysts I've talked to have said, the debate about what the debate could turn into is, and this would be a debate at the legislature, right? Shouldn't the IOU's shareholders just eat the difference? Mm-hmm. Like, we want to boost the CCAs. We don't want to eat into their revenues too much. We want to allow them to have money to reinvest in projects, because the big thing is you want them to have enough money to actually build renewable energy in the county. You want them to enter into long-term contracts with renewable energy developers to build solar and wind in the county locally. That's how the grid really gets transformed. And if they're paying all this money to these exit fees, they don't have as much revenue to invest in that. Well, these SDG&E guys, the shareholders of Sempra, they've made a lot of money over the years. Maybe they should just eat the exit fee. And I think that's what a lot of analysts are saying, that they're concerned that that's where this could go. So, with all that said, the supporters of CCA say, well, it's really the utilities are the ones that have a lot to lose, not us. Let's move forward with this. At the very least, we'll have competition. If the whole thing implodes and it doesn't work, back to square one, sure, it'll be an inconvenience, but we should at least try it. The public, and it does seem like the tide is going that way throughout the state. CCAs are growing really fast. Just in the last couple of years, we now have, I think there's something like 8 or 10. You have to like check every day to see when the next one went operational. But there's something like between 8 and a dozen CCAs that are operating or on the verge of beginning to operate right now, and we expect like another 8 to come online next year. There's like another 24 jurisdictions that are looking at this, including like San Diego and like all the way up to Northern California. And the Public Utilities Commission, in a somewhat nervous en banc hearing earlier this year, they said, you know what? There's a lot of like paperwork and technical stuff, that we need to do to prepare for this new reality. And the state has to be ready in the next few years for CCAs, which now currently represent about 5% of the electrical load in California, to represent, I think they said I have to double check this, but by like 2020, 2025, it could represent as much as 70% of the electrical load, like this huge explosion. They say, not that that's necessarily going to happen, but it's within the realm of possibility, and we have to be prepared for that. So it just kind of gives you a sense for like the possibilities that they're looking at. So, it's kind of it's competition. It's competition for the utility. Now the utility will say electrical generation is just a pass through for us. We don't make money on it. The rates are regulated by the Public Utilities Commission. What we make money on is building infrastructure projects, transmission lines like Sunrise Power Link to move energy around. That's where we get our guaranteed rate of return. But if the exit fee isn't in place properly, which is the big thing that I think they're concerned about, they feel like this could really, this could be a bad situation for them in the long term. Mm-hmm. At least I think that's what they fear. So I don't know if that answered your question.
It answers several questions. But it does seem that if things go smoothly and the exit fee gets reined in to a reasonable amount, a transition to a CCA theoretically shouldn't cost ratepayers more, correct?
Right. And so far throughout the state, CCAs have on average, because remember rates fluctuate, but on average, they've offered more renewable energy at a cheaper price. And when I say a cheaper price, I mean, we're talking,
it's relative.
Yeah, like on $100 bill, a monthly bill for like an average home or something, we're talking, a couple bucks or something like that. So they're pretty comparable. The difference has come in when you say, oh, but we offer you more green energy.
Yeah.
I don't know how much time you have, but like that is like a debate in itself. Are they really offering more green energy? And we touched on it a little bit earlier. The way that you really transform the electrical grid is by building new projects in California. And what CCAs, which remember, they start up as JPAs or enterprise funds, so they don't have a lot of money. It'd be different if the city stepped in and said, oh, we're going to back the CCA and we got all this money to throw at it. And so as banks have had to, and lenders have had to kind of understand the CCA model over time. At first, it was hard for them to get loans to invest in long-term contracts that would actually build renewable energy. And a lot of them were faced criticism from ratepayer advocates or renewable energy advocates and the investor-owned utilities that they were just playing in what's like called the short-term market, trying to either relying on large sources of existing renewable energy like large hydropower, credits, possibly renewable energy credits from out of state, which are the value of they're not that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, you could debate the value of that. But it doesn't have the same impact. What like the advocates are looking for are like these 10, 20, 25-year contracts where we're going to build a new solar installation in San Diego County. And the CCAs have so far not been able to deliver on that. And what they've said is that, you have to give us time. We're new. Lenders are just starting to understand our business model, and they'll show you, hey, look, we have a list of projects that are like now in the pipeline going forward. So the jury's still out. Renewable energy developers are basically they're a little concerned right now. In California, renewable energy developers, these are people that like build wind and solar. They feel like the utilities are full up because they've all met their mandates, going forward for the next couple of years. And CCAs don't have a lot of, they don't have deep pockets yet, right? And so they're just like, there's a lot of developers out there that are dying for CCAs to step up and start building this stuff. And there's a question of, whether they will or not. So that's kind of like the next thing that I think the industry watchers are really interested in seeing.
Thank you so much. Joshua, we'll be right back.
Welcome to America's Finest Fantasy Football Podcast, and we're on Facebook Live. Eddie Brown, Union-Tribune's fantasy expert. You know him because you read him.
To me, fantasy sports has always been about we hacked our favorite game and created another game, and now we're enjoying it.
Kevin Acey, sports columnist, and I'm learning fantasy football.
Waiver wire is like digging for gold. You're out there just randomly digging for gold, and if you can come up with something, that's great. To me, trade is like targeting gold. You know exactly where that gold is, and you want to go get it. America's Finest Fantasy Football, every Wednesday.
Here's something else you need to know this week. A rescue effort will begin this weekend in the Gulf of California, trying to save the critically endangered Vaquita porpoise. Vaquitas are about 5 feet long and have black patches around their eyes and mouth, and there are only about 30 left on Earth. It's so rare that some residents of San Felipe, Mexico, haven't ever seen one.
I live here for 46 years, and never I see the Vaquita marina. I don't know the Vaquita marina.
They've been driven to near extinction because of increased demand for another fish, the totuaba, whose swim bladder is valued in Chinese medicine. One bladder could be sold for $10,000 in the Chinese market. Rafaela Toyasetti, who manages an anti-poaching ship, explains the predicament.
The Gulf of California is home to many endemic species. Two of them are the Vaquita marina and the totuaba. The Vaquita is a very small porpoise that is on the brink of extinction. There's only maybe 30 individuals left. Sea Shepherd has 2 ships, the Sam Simon and the Farley Mowat, in the Gulf of California in Mexico to remove illegal gill nets where the Vaquita get entangled and die.
This weekend, a team of scientists, academics, and Navy dolphins will try to catch a breedable pair of the Vaquita and have them breed in safe facilities in the Gulf of California until a bigger facility can be built. This will be the first time a Vaquita is kept in captivity. Search vessels will look for signs of the Vaquitas using high-powered binoculars and dolphins trained to use echolocation to find them. Then, the boats with nets will trap the Vaquita. Refocus is a production of the San Diego Union-Tribune. This episode was produced by Lauren Flynn and myself, Daniel Wheaton. Keep an eye out for a focus on your podcast feed, and please subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes. For Refocus, I'm Daniel Wheaton. Until next time.